What's going on, YouTube? My name is Batman, and the marketing campaign for Black Ops 3 has been very good so far. But obviously, the question on most COD veterans' minds is, will the game itself be good? Will it live up to the hype? Because every Call of Duty has had a great marketing campaign. 20 million people were hyped as fuck for Ghosts, only to be let down. And of course, this has been the case for many Call of Duties. It's almost like Christmas, where the hype and build-up is more fun and exciting than the event itself. Following the little viral marketing campaigns is more fun than playing the game itself. You spend more time being hyped than you spend playing the game. And this can only happen so many times before we become disillusioned with the entire process, as many COD players already have. We know now that COD sales have been cut in half. This information comes to us courtesy of the NPD Group. This is a popular sales tracking and data analysis company. I know VG Charts updates their numbers based on the NPD reports. I know Forbes uses NPD as well. It was actually a Forbes article discussing COD sales that actually originally made me privy to this dramatic decline in the success and popularity of Call of Duty as a franchise. Now, I actually tried to get in on some of that sales tracking action. I gave NPD a call, but the guy wanted $10,000, so I hung up on him. Anyways, COD sales have been gradually declining with each release, and taken all together, the numbers at a staggering 49% loss relative to its peak with MW3. So these numbers suggest a few things to me. First of all, the major gaming publications, media sources, and Call of Duty-based YouTubers reviewing Call of Duty titles are obviously either incapable or unwilling to review COD titles accurately, because the last few COD titles have received very high marks from these sources, while receiving flat-out rejection and dismissal from the actual player base. At this point, you'll get a more accurate description from a 13-year-old for free than you will ever get from these major gaming media sources for money, and that's pretty sad. This also implies, rather definitively, that Call of Duty sucks, and that is no longer a minority opinion. To put things in perspective, COD's sales peak with MW3 was close to 30 million. If it's dropped 49%, it is now at 15 million, which in terms of commercial success is about on par with its primary competitor, the Battlefield series. I believe Battlefield 3 sold about 17 million, Battlefield 4 sitting at about 12 million. And you have to wonder how much of that success that is left for Call of Duty would be there if it wasn't for the ridiculous amount of resources they are able to pour into their marketing on top of the heavy brand recognition they have. You know what I mean? If you take away those two huge advantages, I don't think Call of Duty would be the top shooter anymore. You take away all the major gaming media outlets and YouTubers jerking it off for 6 months straight every year. You take away the huge financial advantage it has in marketing. I don't think it would be the top shooter anymore. Now, as far as we can tell, this doesn't seem to concern Activision very much, because this dramatic drop in sales has not prompted any dramatic changes or reinvestments in the series. I'm sure in part because they've made up that huge profit loss with Destiny. Despite the failures of Call of Duty recently, their quarterly profits, I'm sure, have still been going up thanks to Destiny and all the DLC and whatnot, and that might be why we haven't seen any significant reinvestment in Call of Duty recently, because I'm sure there's going to be a higher return on that investment if it's put into attracting new customers to Destiny than trying to re-attract old COD fans to COD. So instead of spending money to make COD better, they just make up the losses with investments into Destiny. Or at least that's the only rational reason I can think of to explain why a 49% sales drop, 15 million customers, wouldn't prompt any kind of major course change in the franchise. But I digress. The point is, they've largely stuck to the same script, despite these massive financial losses, right? Which is very disappointing, because there are several systemic problems that have plagued Call of Duty for the last few years that are driving this consumer flight. And you'd think that this dramatic sales drop would have encouraged them to make some progress in these areas, but they haven't really. Thus far, they've only really addressed one criticism, which is that Call of Duty is the same game every year. So they've made some significant changes to the mobility. Looks like this time in Black Ops 3, they're ripping wall running straight out of Titanfall. It's kind of funny. The original COD developers are still making the biggest innovations to Call of Duty. Think about that for a second, right? Because, you know, the guys who made MW2 and COD 4 went and made Titanfall. They knew what the next best innovation was going to be. Call of Duty ended up ripping it right out of their game. I mean, literally, the wall running in Black Ops 3 looks basically identical to what we saw in Titanfall. So in their own special way, those original COD developers that we loved are still, you know, developing Call of Duty games. But in the long run, I don't think that the lack of change was ever the biggest problem people had with the game. I don't think that's what was predominantly turning off a majority of those 15 million players who have abandoned the series. I think COD is similar to Madden in the sense that core experience can retain its appeal. I've been playing a lot of COD 4 on the PC recently, and it's still addicting as fuck, and it's just the same old, basically bare bones Call of Duty experience. But it doesn't suffer from a lot of the bullshit that have plagued recent Call of Duty titles. Outside of fans' desire for more significant changes each year, there are other, much bigger problems, many of which may be very difficult for ex-fans to articulate, that severely degrade the enjoyment of the Call of Duty experience. And these issues have been around for a while, and I think many fans have given up on Call of Duty because they've given up on the developers ever addressing any of these issues, because, they've been in, and I'm going to talk about what these issues are, but basically they've, been in these games for 3 or 4 titles in a row, and every year we think, oh, next year COD will be better, and a lot of the time it's not even that we're expecting huge improvements or innovations, we're just expecting them to fix some of the bullshit that everybody's been complaining about in the most recent game, but then they never do, and I think that is sort of the mentality that is driving people away. People are giving up on the developers addressing their concerns. And for some reason, again, losing 15 million customers still hasn't encouraged these developers or Activision to ultimately address those concerns that we're going to be talking about in this commentary. So in this commentary, I want to talk about what those issues are. I want to talk about the things that have made past Call of Duty games bad. These issues include, but are not limited to, lag and severe connectivity issues, a severely outdated and underperforming game engine, an incredibly static and repetitive gameplay experience that has gradually cut out any meaningful opportunity for creative problem solving or critical thought, a Frankenstein skill gap that artificially inflates the success of everyone no matter how bad they are in a way that degrades the overall quality of the entire game and turns off series veterans who recognize how pointless and hollow competition has become in Call of Duty, and an incentive structure that is exclusively based on a player's individual success, and with individual success being judged wholly by KD. This year, instead of just getting hyped about the stuff we do hear about, instead of just focusing on all the neat things that developers tell the major Call of Duty YouTubers to tell us, let's focus on the things we aren't hearing about, because these are the things that COD needs to be better. These are the things that are driving longtime fans away from the series, and these are the things that Activision doesn't want to talk about. And they will do their very best to distract us with what's new, with what's good, without ever addressing valid concerns about what went wrong in the past and what's being done to correct those problems in future Call of Duties. And hopefully, if we as a community and a fan base bring these things up and continue to shine a light on these issues, if we make these problems a part of the conversation, Activision will feel pressure to actually do something about them, because they submit to pressure all the time when the community is pissed off about it enough. Right? Because community anger does translate into less sales. So for instance, the dedicated server system. People's frustration with the terrible connectivity issues in Call of Duty and the frequent host migrations and games dropping altogether and hosts dashboarding. People were getting very upset about these things. It eventually put enough pressure on Activision to provide a dedicated server system. Now we're going to talk about why that system doesn't nearly go far enough as it needs to towards fixing the real problem that pissed off so many people originally. But the original outburst of frustration from the community did have an effect. There was a tangible result. So it is possible, but they only did the bare minimum in order to diffuse the controversy, because that's the most profitable option, and of course profit is what this is all about. So if we want them to take further steps towards actually addressing the systemic issues which have frustrated so many of us in the past, which have turned off so many players, then we need to put more pressure on them regarding these issues by doing a better job of consistently and effectively voicing our frustrations with the areas in which Call of Duty has been coming up short game after game. And the catch is that they will do everything they can to diffuse the controversy without actually addressing the problem, because it's more profitable to make you forget about a problem, or to convince you a problem isn't a problem at all, or to convince you the problem has been fixed when it hasn't, than it is to actually fix the problem, right? Because fixing the problem is expensive. So they're going to use their own PR people, and of course through the major Call of Duty YouTubers whose channels are so dependent on the special access Activision grants them and are thus beholden to their wishes, while acting as third-party independent corroborators when they are anything but. They're going to use their media sources to try and diffuse this controversy without actually fixing the problem. And I'm going to talk about a few examples of how they've done that in the past. We're going to talk about the real problems that are in Call of Duty that have driven the mass exodus of fans, what should be done to address them, why Activision hasn't addressed them, and what clever PR tactics they've employed to get away with not addressing them. And I do think that Call of Duty can be a great game again, because again, you get on COD 4 right now. I know they're about to do backwards compatibility for the X1. You can start getting back on COD 4 and World at War. You get on those games, you'll recognize pretty quickly that that traditional Call of Duty experience was a masterpiece, and it's still there under all the bullshit. There's still a bare bones Twitch shooter arena Call of Duty experience that is a lot of fun, and it can be reattained, but first we have to encourage Treyarch to cut the bullshit. We have to say no to Black Ops 3 bullshit. We need to force Activision into a position where the only option, and thus the most profitable option, to address the criticism is to actually fix the problem, as opposed to just convincing us that the game is on a new engine when it isn't. You know what I mean? So what we want is as many people to recognize that bullshit so that there's a greater chance of a greater amount of people saying, hey, we're not going to buy into this if you're not going to address our concerns. Like, hey, gore is great. No panic knifing is great. Gunsmith is cool, but these things aren't going to amount to jack diddly if this game still suffers from the same game-breaking lag that has plagued COD titles for the last 5 years. Anytime we discuss the quality of a Call of Duty game, lag is the 500-pound gorilla in the fucking room. Now, what I and many others refer to as lag is actually not the proper technical term for what we're talking about here, because the term lag implies that this is a problem to do with connectivity, or lack thereof, when that's simply not the case. The bitter truth is that the significant delays we experience in Call of Duty are built into the netcode. They are present on LAN and even split screen. So I'd like to show you a clip. This is courtesy of OvenBakedMuffin, who has made some great videos covering the technical aspects of this problem, and who I'd also like to thank for answering many of my questions when researching this video. I'll include a link to his channel in the description. Now you'll notice we have a significant delay in this clip, and it's not actually split screen. This is just good editing on OvenBakedMuffin's part. This is player to player on LAN. Now LAN uses the same netcode as you'll find in matchmaking, and what this means is that this delay is the best case scenario for any match of COD ever played online, because this is the best possible connection for two separate machines, because it's on LAN, right? And indeed, even if you went to split screen on a single machine, you would see significant delays, further inferring severe netcode flaws. But split screen uses different netcode procedures than online play, so we're going to stick with the LAN as our primary example here. This is as good as it can get, alright? This problem exists in every game and every gunfight that takes place on Call of Duty. And in fact, usually you will experience worse delays in online play because the vast majority of the time you're going to be connecting to farther away places than you are on a LAN network, meaning you'll have added connection delays on top of already game-breaking netcode delays. But I just want to be absolutely clear, this is the best case scenario. This is COD performing at its best with the least amount of lag, and even at its best, the delays are game-breaking, period. And if it's not fixed on LAN, it's not going to be fixed on a dedicated server. So if you ever feel like your connection is performing better than what you're seeing here, it's because you have a connection advantage over your opponents who are undoubtedly experiencing a more severe version of this at your hands to their great frustration. This is game breaking. This is a broken fucking game. It's funny, you know, the biggest complaint with Battlefield 4 at its launch was its severely broken netcode, but even at its worst, Battlefield 4 was never this consistently bad, and it got fixed, while Call of Duty has been more broken for 5 years running. And everybody's cool with it. You know why? Because it's so much harder to notice in Call of Duty because the TTK is so low. For me personally, this calls into question the legitimacy of any gunfight that ever takes place in the game. Calls into question the integrity of COD as an esport. You know, Call of Duty is a game where death takes less than a second, and when you have delays this bad, delays often lasting longer than the time to kill itself, who's to say any particular gunfight was determined by skill? In a track meet, if sprinters in a 100-meter dash were randomly suffering from 100 millisecond delays, the race would be considered illegitimate and wins would mean nothing. Now what's more frustrating is that this has been going on for a while. We can go back to Black Ops 2 and see this same delay taking place on LAN as well, and it's something that the community has complained about consistently and vociferously for years, and yet it's something the developers have refused to fix, which is very puzzling to me, because this is an issue that has hurt them significantly. This is the top complaint among Call of Duty fans. It was a huge controversy in Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2. It's been a huge controversy in Advanced Warfare, and yet this broken netcode that is completely on their end and within their power to fix remains unattended for 5 years running. Now, I don't want to spend too much time talking about what I've accused COD developers of in the past, which is the concept that they are leaving the lag in the game intentionally because it fosters a system of random that disproportionately benefits weaker players who get free connection-based kills they would otherwise never get, while veteran players would get those free kills without the connection advantage anyways and thus do not benefit as significantly, and while simultaneously taking unavoidable connection-based deaths from players they would otherwise outplay, bringing everyone closer to equilibrium, which is of course what many of COD's gameplay mechanics are designed to do anyways, including their map design, spawn design, and skill-based matchmaking itself. I don't want to go too far into that theory because I feel like the rest of my arguments become overshadowed by my tinfoil hat, so it's not on purpose. Instead, we'll explore the only other possibility. If it's not intentional, then they are too cheap to fix it. The only other rational possibility might be that they are too incompetent to fix it. They just straight up don't know how, but I'm not buying that. This is the most successful video game franchise in history. They have the deepest pool of resources and talent in the industry. Are we really supposed to believe they are just genuinely incapable of repairing this obviously game-breaking and clearly demonstrable bug? So that leaves us with one logical possibility. Fixing this problem would require a significant amount of labor, possibly a complete overhaul of the game engine, and even with the 3-year development cycle, they simply don't have the time to do that and still build the full game. Now, they could hire extra programmers to maybe take on that extra load of work in a similar time frame. But of course, in this scenario, they are too cheap to do that. But again, I still feel like the most likely explanation is that they want it in there, because this is a huge complaint among the community for so long that I can't see how it wouldn't be cost effective to put the extra resources into fixing the issue. You know, I'm an Occam's razor kind of guy. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. In this instance, I think they've calculated that the delays do more good than harm, possibly because many players don't notice the lag, but everyone notices getting shit on consistently, and this lag ensures that everybody gets to roll the dice and get some free kills sometimes, no matter what. But I know people like to get on me for having no hard evidence, so I'll tell you what, we'll leave it at this. We know the game-breaking delays are in the game. They are demonstratable, it's something you can repeat for yourself at home on split screen or LAN. We know it's been in there since Black Ops 2. We know this is something that pisses off a lot of current and former COD fans. So, why hasn't it been fixed after all this time? Feel free to come up with your own theory and lay out your thinking. And in fact, that's what you need to do if you're going to argue I'm wrong. And I'm looking at you, Drifter, because there is a reason. There is an explanation. It has to exist. And at the end of the day, I don't see what it could be outside of either they are too stupid to fix it, they are too cheap to fix it, or they don't want to fix it. I think the third option is the most likely. But regardless, we have to be clear about something else. So long as these game-breaking delays are in the game, skill-based matchmaking should not be. You know, in that Fireside Chat newsletter that Conju released in an attempt to diffuse the SBMM controversy, he said that COD always prioritizes connection over skill in the sense that it chooses players of a similar skill level but only from your region. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that that doesn't go far enough. With these kinds of significant and consistent delays, matchmaking shouldn't just prioritize connections in your region, but should prioritize connections as close to a LAN as physically possible 100% of the time. Because regions can be pretty big. You know, Washington and Arizona are in the same region, West US. But with these kinds of game-breaking delays, players in Washington should not be connecting to players as far away as Arizona. With these kinds of game-breaking delays, getting players as close as physically possible to one another should be the sole criteria of matchmaking. Skill should not be prioritized in any way at any point, especially because the severity of these delays calls into question what role skill even plays in the game. And that's not because I'm against skill-based matchmaking. I 100% support fair, evenly matched games between players of equal skill. But with these game-breaking delays built into the netcode, there's no such thing as a fair match. And SBMM only makes the problem worse. So ideally, what needs to happen is we need to have Treyarch formally acknowledge the problem exists, which they haven't done so far. And in order to do that, we need our frustration with the problem to reach a point where they are forced to address it. But if and when that happens, we need to be wary of how they address it. It can't just be a tweet. It can't just be an announcement. We gotta keep them honest, and we can't forget, and we gotta keep the pressure up until the day it releases. Because this has happened before, where the community's frustration with lag has reached a tipping point on 2 occasions. The first being after Black Ops 2, which in my mind was the laggiest Call of Duty to date, followed closely by Black Ops 1, which is why I'm extra concerned about the problem in Black Ops 3. And at that point in time, when people were pissed off enough, Activision felt compelled to announce a level of dedicated server support for the next Call of Duty. And again, that's a great example of community frustration translating into tangible results. Unfortunately, although the announcement of dedicated servers quelled all the rage and calmed everybody down, including myself, because we all assumed it would fix the problem, it didn't actually fix the problem. Because we didn't realize how much of this problem was embedded into the fucking netcode itself, into the game. Oh, and what's also strange is that this didn't exist in those earlier Call of Duties, COD 4 and MW2. COD 4 and MW2, something changed in the netcode. That's the other thing that I think is really fucking suspicious. You did not have these netcode delays in COD 4 and World at War, and that's something you can test for yourself. They just magically got put into the game and never got taken out. Just saying, kind of fishy. But you know, I don't have a smoking gun document to prove it, so don't take what I have to say seriously. So they announced the dedicated servers, it calmed everybody down, but of course it didn't actually fix the problem because it's not something dedicated servers can fix. But I also want to take a second to point out that as far as their dedicated server system went, they really did do the bare minimum. It's kind of a slap in the fucking face. You know, they go on about how they use a hybrid system of dedicated and listen servers, and they talk that up as if it's a good thing. But all a listen server is a player host, and that's what COD has always used. All they're saying is we will now be bringing in dedicated servers sometimes. We have the worst lag problems of any first-person shooter in history, but we feel comfortable giving some dedicated server support to some players sometimes. Who cares if every other FPS on the market from Battlefield to Homefront provided full dedicated server support? We are too indie for that shit. As it is, depending on the quality of your internet package, you will connect to a dedicated server either all of the time, or basically never at all. When you first start up the game and go into multiplayer, the game is going to test your connection. If it's strong enough, it'll put you on a dedicated server all the time. If it's not strong enough, it won't put you on a dedicated server ever, until you've turned the game off and turned it back on, prompting another connection test, because it only tests at the beginning of your play sessions when you first start the game up. And then it makes a decision for the entirety of that play session, but unless you're changing locations or getting a new internet package in that time, it's probably going to reach the same conclusion as the first test. Again, this information is courtesy of OvenBakedMuffin, whose great lag comp video review can be found in the description below. It's an all or nothing type of deal, so if you want to know if you're connecting to a dedicated server or not, ask yourself when the last time you experienced a host migration was. If you experience a host migration, that means you haven't connected to a dedicated server for the entirety of that play session. If you assess how frequently you see host migrations in general, you can get a pretty good idea of how often you're connecting to deddies, because every host migration means that for that entire play session, you weren't on a deddy. And again, unless something drastic changes in between play sessions, you're usually going to get the same results as before. I get host migrations all the fucking time, both in Advanced Warfare and Call of Duty Ghosts, when they originally announced the dedicated listen server hybrid bullshit system server following everyone getting pissed off about Black Ops 2, right? Came in for Ghosts. I got host migrations all the time in Ghosts. I still get them pretty frequently. But if you want to see what real full dedicated server support looks like, you look at a typical Battlefield game. That game doesn't even have a host migration screen. It doesn't exist, right? Because that shit never happens in a Battlefield game. Even if your internet sucks, you can still connect to a deddy, because it's full dedicated server support, and they're actually high quality servers, not whatever ghetto shit COD uses that can't even sustain anything less than the most expensive internet packages. In Battlefield 4, worst case scenario, you might drop connection to a server, but you can always just rejoin the same server. It never crashes for every player in the match at the same time, and it never has to migrate hosts. If Black Ops 3 has a host migration screen, if they had to design a screen and a mechanic for the host migration to take place, they're cheap fucks who do not care about their fans, period. COD is the most profitable game on the market and has been for 6 years straight, and the best thing they can provide us is ghetto-ass deddies half of the time. For some people, they are laughing at us. They are laughing at every COD player who's bought into this shit for the last 5 years, because they're taking your money and lying to you and getting away with it. It's like taking candy from a baby. It's like taking candy from fucking 15 million babies. That's a lot of fucking candy, man. Some type 2 diabetes shit. But of course, this is all a moot point, because dedicated servers won't actually fix the real lag problem, because it's built into the netcode itself. But I just wanted to point out how hollow those PR tactics can really be, and why we have to be very wary, very suspicious of their PR tactics going forward. Because it's the bullshit they continue to fall back on. You know, the second time the community's frustration with lag reached a tipping point was this year with Advanced Warfare when it first dropped. I think because the exosuits made it especially noticeable, the netcode problem. And, you know, they got a lot of negative press for it, but ultimately they were able to diffuse the controversy by reiterating the same bullshit they used after Black Ops 2. You know, Michael Condrey had his little fireside chat thing and went on about their global system of dedicated and listen servers and how awesome they were for using a hybrid to ensure the best possible connection at all times, and everyone calmed down and kind of forgot about it. When it's bullshit. It's just bullshit. And even if it wasn't bullshit, that wouldn't solve the problem, because repeat after me, the lag is built into the game and exists even when you aren't connected to the internet, and it's important that everybody understands that. It is a game engine problem. It's not about connectivity. As of right now, there is no reason to believe that Black Ops 3 won't lag. Please don't kid yourself. Let's not be foolish about this. I have hoped sincerely for like 4 or 5 CODs in a row that in the next COD the lag would be better. And it never is. We have to bitch about this right now. We have to force them to acknowledge that it's the netcode itself which is broken, which thus far they have been doing their best to keep on the down low. But if you wait till after the game is released, it'll be too late, because everyone will have already bought the game. They'll be able to weather the storm, having already gotten their money out of all of us. And by the time Call of Duty Ghosts 2 releases, everybody will have once again calmed down and forgotten about how broken the game is, and then they'll be reminded again after the next one releases, and then they'll calm down by the next release, and it goes on and on and on. And 30 years from now, our children are playing Call of Duty, breaking controllers and, you know, high-tech 3D hologram virtual reality TVs throwing their virtual reality headsets at the TVs because they're so angry about the lag. And they'll say, "Daddy, why didn't you fix this?" Because I was too distracted. And hey, let me be clear about this. If you aren't gonna bitch about lag right now, don't you bitch about it after the game has come out. When you're playing that game next year, you're gonna get shot from around the corner and up the street, and you're gonna scream and rage, "God damn it, why is this game so laggy?" But save your breath. You need to throw all the temper tantrums that you know you eventually will throw right now. Or don't throw them at all. So we've seen them diffuse the lag controversy by announcing a non-solution. Doesn't actually solve anything, but tricks people into thinking it will. And this is the kind of ambiguous, misleading, disingenuous, sleazy PR tactic that they've also used to defend and or justify their outdated, underperforming game engine. Because lag is probably the biggest turnoff for ex-COD fans, but it isn't the only thing that makes this game unenjoyable. I do think part of the problem is just genuine franchise fatigue, and this fatigue is the result of a game that refuses to put in the time or resources to get better. They don't want to spend the money to provide high-quality dedicated servers to the entirety of their 15 million fans because that would cost a lot of money, and every dollar spent is a dollar less the major shareholders and CEOs get to take home to mama. And that same sentiment is true for a new engine. Building a new engine would require a major investment of time and resources. It'd be like building a game that you don't get to sell. But it would modernize an archaic and dying franchise because it's something they could use for every future title. They are trying to thread this needle where they keep the franchise alive, but at consistently maximum profits, which means never having to reinvest in it. It's like I was talking about with Halo. It's short-term, profit-driven thinking. It's like they're trying to sprint a marathon. Ultimately, this shortchanges the customers and in the long run kills the franchises. You can't sprint an entire marathon. Our goal is to force them into a position where maintaining the status quo is less profitable than reinvestment. And nowhere is that status quo as obviously coming up short as Call of Duty's lackluster game engine. And it's also worth noting that COD's terrible game engine may be a significant contributing factor to the atrocious netcode causing game-breaking lag delays. Now, every year COD tries to play it off like they're using a new engine this time around, but really that's a lie. They try to find some clever, ambiguous way to call the engine new in a way that might lead the casual observer to think there will be some technological advancements in the next COD, when really there won't be. With Advanced Warfare, they said they completely overhauled the audio and graphics engine. I didn't notice any significant improvements over past Call of Duties. And they've actually been caught in this lie before in an interview with PlayStation Magazine. It was kind of funny and really awkward. But they're interviewing one of the head programmers, and ultimately the interviewer does a superb job and presses him on the new engine. Is it really new? And he has to crack and admit it's still the Quake engine from the 1990s. This is in Ghosts last year, right? He comes out, he calls it the Quake engine, and he just looks so... I encourage you to watch it. I'm going to link it in the description. It's really awkward, and he looks really... You can tell he's going to get some shit for it later on. He spilled the beans. But yeah, I'll link that video in the description. I wanted to show you the clip from that interview, but I'm worried it'll get copyrighted because I got fucking copyrighted on that hour-long Halo 5 video because I included that interview that's in Spanish with subtitles. Remember that? I got copyrighted for that, and I wasn't even tripping. I just thought it meant I can't run ads on it. But then it turns out those motherfuckers who own that interview get to run ads on my hour-long video that I spent like a month working on. So they get to make money off my 60 minutes of content because I included one of their shitty fucking pathetic 3-minute interviews that people only give a shit about because they interviewed some fucking tweaker who isn't even that funny if you read the actual translation. Sorry, just had to get that off my chest, but I digress. The game still relies on the quote-unquote custom IW engine, which is a modified version of the Quake engine. But they prefer to call it the IW engine because if they called it what it really is, you'd realize that it's this Frankenstein fucking thing from 1998. Now, to be fair, that Quake engine was very good, and certainly how long it's lasted and how much they've done with it is a testament to its quality. But there are a few areas in which Call of Duty drastically needs to improve and which it will never be able to improve on this engine. The advantages to a new and modernized engine would be significant. A great example, as always, is Battlefield. Battlefield used to rely on the Refractor engine, which you can see in all its glory in these clips. Then they upgraded to Frostbite. This allowed them, first of all, to fucking pimp the graphic fidelity of the game. Right, it looks a lot better, and that's something I feel that Call of Duty really needs. They've changed art styles, but really, MW2 was COD's graphical peak. And even if you think it was a different game, you can't deny that COD's graphics have not improved in any meaningful way in the last 7 years, even though apparently the graphics engine got a complete overhaul for Advanced Warfare. So it allowed Battlefield to have much better graphics, and Battlefield is a beautiful game now that it's at 60 frames per second, but it also allowed Battlefield to genuinely build a technologically superior game, right? They're able to fit in a whole lot more stuff on the screen at once, whether it's new vehicles or whatever. They're able to include full-scale destruction. Now they have evolution, but look at how much more stuff Battlefield can have going on at once. 60 64 players, vehicles blowing up as skyscrapers fall down and jets colliding and all that jazz. Not to mention, Battlefield is able to do all this while maintaining a much more accurate and smooth netcode. And I'm not trying to shove Battlefield down your throat and say it's so much better than Call of Duty. You know, there are huge differences between these games and what kind of players they appeal to, and certainly Battlefield has had its own shortcomings and failures in the past with its launch. But I'm just saying, look at what Battlefield is able to do on the new gen. Look at how much better it looks and how many more operations it's able to run simultaneously, how much more stuff they have taking place on your screen without losing frames. And compare that to Call of Duty. It's a stark contrast, you know? Compare a helicopter blowing up in Battlefield to when you shoot down a score streak in COD. You know, it's laughable. Compare Battlefield's fully destructible terrain with COD's sometimes slowly moving some specific scripted polygonic block from position A to position B. Does that mean that Call of Duty should have destructible environments in 32v32? No, but you know, just imagine the possibilities in terms of graphical fidelity and the wide ranges of experiences and events and cool shit going down that would be available in a pimped out 6v6 arena like COD. If Battlefield can do all that with 32v32 on a large-scale Battlefield, you know? When you look at the stuff going on a COD map today, you know, again, you know, look at a map like Biolab. You know, on Biolab, it moves the little room, it's this little square room, moves it from point A to point B, right? Slightly changes the layout of the map. Anytime you see any sort of real-time dynamic event, quote-unquote, take place in a COD map, it's always this really just like pathetic, you know, moving one very static object at a scripted time in a scripted way from point A to point B, and usually point A is very close to point B. And when you look at, you know, when you destroy a score streak, it's really blocky and shitty looking, and it disappears before it even hits the ground, right? And that's because they know they have to maintain 60 frames per second, but they can't do anything more than the bare minimum of what they're doing on this engine and maintain 60 frames per second. A new engine would fix that, because you can look at everything that Battlefield is able to do with 60 frames per second. And it doesn't mean that COD should like I was just saying, it doesn't mean that COD should copy Battlefield, but you know, just imagine, you know, real-time dynamic weather events with lightning and wind throwing off the trajectory of your grenades, and you know, people are randomly getting struck by lightning, and sometimes there's hail the size of golf balls and tornadoes and ragdoll effects in the tornado, and from every explosion has intense ragdoll effects. You know, you get hit by a rocket, your body flies across the map for everybody to see and laugh at, and fire that spreads across burnable objects, and when you shoot down a score streak, the explosion is fucking brutal, and debris lands everywhere, and you can use it as cover, and all the dead bodies on the map never disappear, and they call in a dog's kill streak, and all the dead dogs' bodies are still lying around, and there's pools of blood forming, and you shoot an oil can, and it leaks out gas, and it mixes with the blood, and then all that shit catches on fire, and the dynamic map event kicks in, and it's a fucking spaceship like from Black Ops 1. Remember that map launch? Except this time, instead of just taking off, the rocket ship crashes on takeoff and falls over and cuts the map in half in an epic Levolution event, and debris and fire going everywhere, and then you can go into the spaceship, and there's crazy monkeys have broken out of their cages, and they have flamethrower penises, and they're going everywhere, and then both teams have to unite to stop the monkey flamethrower cock menace. As it is, the huge improvement this year is that Black Ops 3 will have gore, you know, House Super, and improved modern engines also usually make game production easier and faster, giving COD developers that much more time to pimp out their product. But even if COD fixed the netcode and got rid of those game-breaking delays, even if it had full dedicated server support and a brand spanking new game engine with awesome new graphics and such, there's still one major, fundamental problem with Call of Duty that is driving fans away, which is the unnaturally compressed skill gap and the way that compressed skill gap degrades the overall quality of the game. And the other reason it needs a new engine is because, unfortunately, this compressed skill gap is also the only thing COD has to offer at this point. It's the one thing that COD has that other games aren't already doing better. On the pre-gen, you know, it had 60 frames per second, which was a big advantage. Doesn't have that anymore. The only thing it has left is its compressed skill gap. That's all it can do that other games aren't already doing better. COD is not a superior product to its primary FPS competitors. It does not have better graphics, it does not have better sound, it does not have more depth, it does not have better game mechanics. And not only is it entirely outdated, but taken together with the nature of its broken netcode, it is a subpar, slap in the fucking face for $60 product. You are paying $60 to be slapped in your fucking face. It is the lowest quality shooter on the market, and it has been ever since the new gen consoles came out and it lost its 60 frames per second edge. All it has is its compressed skill gap. It is the one game, perhaps in the history of shooters, that guarantees you free kills with little to no actual skill. It's like foosball. Foosball will never be as fun, exciting, rewarding, or as beneficial to your health as a real match of soccer. But the advantage to foosball is that morbidly obese kids can compete with super athletic kids, and 10-year-olds can compete with adults. It compresses the skill gap. In Call of Duty, even the most incompetent fuck among us can go toe-to-toe with just about anyone else, because the game is designed solely with the intent of providing as many players as many free kills as often as possible. This super compressed skill gap is both its greatest strength, well, its only strength at this point, and its greatest weakness, because despite the advantages it has in attracting the casual masses, the suppressed skill gap comes at a significant cost to the game's overall quality. A cost that sooner or later even casuals begin to reject. And when you look at games like Halo 4, Battlefield Hardline, these are sequels that tried to copy Call of Duty by compressing the skill gap when compared to their predecessors. But both those games tanked. Halo 4 was rejected by the fanbase, and everything that game tried to do has been abandoned in Halo 5. And, as it stands, Battlefield 4 has a higher player population than Hardline on both PC and the Xbox One, and I'm assuming if that's the case, probably the other 3 platforms those games launched on as well. Why did these games tank? Because the fan bases of both those franchises immediately recognized the significant toll on a game's quality that the skill gap compression took. This is the great challenge that gamers of our generation face, is rejecting low-quality games that appeal to the most incompetent and lazy players among us, who are bad at games and don't have any interest in taking the time to get better. When a game is catered to those types of players, the game's quality suffers, and the rest of us suffer. Now, I know I've talked a lot about this concept before, the notion that compressed skill gaps destroy a game's quality, particularly in those videos I made about SBMM and Hardline vs. Advanced Warfare, both of which I highly recommend you watch if you haven't seen yet, if you want a more in-depth explanation of the many specific ways this is happening in Call of Duty and other games. But I do want to very quickly basically repeat verbatim what I've said about the low TTK before, because that's the most obvious example I can think of and also the most frustrating. It's the easiest way to describe the negative effect a lower skill gap has on a game's quality. When the TTK is this low in an effort to compress the skill gap, with this little recoil across all gun types, the guns begin to all blur together. It doesn't matter what gun you're using, because it doesn't make a difference, because they aren't going to require you to adopt a different playstyle. If you switch from the BAL-27 assault rifle to the ASM-1 SMG, you are still going to play this game the exact same way. And this is why COD always has problems with one gun rising above the rest, because the gun stats don't mean shit. All that matters is ease of use. And at this point, there's really only one playstyle available in COD, and it just comes down to what gun complements that playstyle the best. The SMG weapon class has barely any distinct advantage over ARs in close quarters because the TTK is already as low as it can possibly be, so there's no advantage left to give the SMG. It ruins the game depth. The vast majority of the time, switching weapons is not going to alter your gameplay experience. I'm sure we can all agree that it would be lame if there was a shooter game that only had one gun available for use. But in practice, that's basically what COD has become. The biggest difference between weapons is aesthetic. They are very rarely going to significantly impact the way you are playing the game. It also means that many weapons are going to be relegated to novelty status, in the sense that you can only use these weapons because you want to switch it up a bit, but you readily admit and accept that you're putting yourself at a severe disadvantage by using them. For instance, using a shotgun in Advanced Warfare is putting yourself at a disadvantage. The shotguns have no advantage in this game. When the TTK between the LMG and an AR is so close, but the LMG has significantly longer ADS and strafe times, why would you use the LMG? Unless, of course, you use stock and quick draw to turn it into an AR, but then you're playing it the same exact way you play the AR. You see what I'm saying? And again, I've talked about map design a lot too, but when you look at Advanced Warfare's map design, because of the mobility, and because you can just jump over anything at any time and go in any direction at any time, it's basically like being in a flat parking lot, right? So imagine you're playing a game where you have one gun, and everyone spawns in a flat parking lot with their one gun, and they just run around in the parking lot shooting at each other and getting shot at. It's like a fucking Facebook browser minigame. And that's what Call of Duty basically is at this point, underneath all the aesthetics. It's like they've dressed it up to look really interesting, but at the end of the day, everyone is running around in one parking lot with one gun. Because the maps have some, buildings and structure to them, but the mobility basically cancels those out. You see what I'm saying? But see, that's when it becomes sort of harder to explain. I had to use a whole video to explain that shit. So you should just go watch those other videos. But outside of that, there's no sandbox. There's no room for creativity or teamwork to make a difference in the gameplay. Because the problem with a sandbox is that some kids' sandcastles are going to be fucking epic, while other kids are just going to have a shitty little mound. In the real sandbox, I was the kid with the shitty little mound, and I remember feeling bad about myself because other kids had awesome sandcastles. But the thing is, in a competitive video game, the really cool sandcastles and the shitty sandcastles have to fight, and one of them's gonna win. So they have to take the sandbox out of the game to keep that skill gap low, because the problem is people would be making these sick-ass sandcastles that would be shitting all over my little fuck-twit mound in the sandcastle, So they got to take that out. They got to make sure everybody has sandcastles that are within the same, quality range, right? But the problem is the sandbox is where so much of the fun is. Something me and my friends have been doing in Battlefield lately is we get in the little bird, right? I'll be flying, and you have two passengers hanging out the sides of the chopper, right? So we have one guy shooting javelin rockets, and the other guy has C4. And what we fucking do is the javelin guy shoots a rocket at a tank, it disables him briefly, alright, so he can't move. And then if you fly over the motherfucker with my chopper, and then the guy on my left side drops the C4 on the tank from the air, and we take off and fly away like badasses, and he triggers the C4 and the tank explodes behind us in the background. And it's fun, and it's a sandbox tactic, and not even that creative of one. We're just taking advantage of a launcher, a piece of equipment, and a vehicle, and incorporating those three things together in a creative way that is super effective. And that's a perfect example of how a sandbox can be a lot of fun, but also very effective, right? Because it's like, well, now the guy in the tank has to figure out how to counter that next time. It requires thinking and learning and getting better. And it's teamwork. And our personal bonds as people grow stronger. We're working together and communicating and having a blast together, working towards a common goal. And there's a million different types of scenarios like that in Battlefield 4 because there's so many interesting and unique pieces of equipment and weapons and vehicles that can be used together effectively. And they took a lot of that shit out of Hardline to compress the skill gap, and that's why not as many people like Hardline. And that kind of shit doesn't exist in Call of Duty either. There's no room for creative gameplay. There really isn't any room for teamwork either. And this is why I kind of think COD as an esport is such a joke right now. Not only because the game-breaking lag delays delegitimize every match in the organization's history, but also because if you listen to these professional teams, there isn't really any teamwork going on. The most they do is tell each other where a bad guy is, right? The call out. But then it's just up to one person to win a gunfight against that guy. It's not actual teamwork. It's just saying, hey, there's a bad guy over here. You better go fight him. They aren't actually working together. They're just kind of briefly acting as a type of UAV for one another occasionally. Game depth and ultimately what we call replay value is dependent on the sandbox. And again, I've mentioned this before, but just think of it in the terms of the phases you go through. How many different games are in your game? In Battlefield, I can play a tank minigame. I can play a helicopter minigame as the secondary gunner in the attack chopper, or a totally different minigame as the pilot of that attack chopper. I go through my Operation Locker 24/7 minigame, my Little Bird minigame, my light tank, my Amtrak minigames. Every vehicle is like its own fucking game. Every vehicle in the game has as much depth as the entirety of Call of Duty in terms of its replay value. I'm kind of going through a commander mode phase right now. These periods of time where you try something new and it's novel and it's fun and interesting and gives you an entirely new and unique way to experience the game. COD has one phase, the run around in circles and shoot people phase. It's the same shit across every game mode and every map. You play the exact same way, regardless of how you set up your class, regardless of what game mode you're playing, regardless of who you're playing with. You play the exact same way every time. You run around, shoot at people, get shot at. There's no teamwork, very little room for any kind of meaningful tactical play or variety. And that's true for everyone, even if they don't want to admit it, because COD is the only game they're good at. They want to pretend that means something, even though it doesn't, because COD is a children's game. It's the equivalent of fucking Candyland. It is a big joke, and it has been for at least the last 5 years. The skill gap is so compressed that they've completely taken away the joy of getting good at something. I think a big part of what's hurting their numbers is kids noticing no matter how hard they try, they can't get better. I've noticed because there was a time when I was obsessed with Call of Duty. From MW2 to Black Ops 2, I wanted to master COD, and I tried really, really hard to accomplish that. And I want to briefly show you my Black Ops 2 combat record. I want to show you this partly out of vain, because I worked hard on it back in the day, and I never had the chance to really show it off to anyone, because that is what the combat record's primary purpose is to accommodate our vanity and ego, whether you admit that to yourself or not. But I also want to make it clear that when I talk about the nature of COD's overly compressed skill gap, I'm speaking as someone who has spent a lot of fucking time trying to understand it completely, and thus manipulate it to my advantage. When I was trying to be the very best, like no one ever was, to rape noobs is my first test, to mock them is my cause, I regularly critiqued myself, and I focused on what I needed to do better, and in particular, I focused on what was causing my deaths, and how those deaths could be avoided. And this is when I began to notice that a lot of my deaths were simply unavoidable, completely out of my control. There was nothing I could do differently to avoid those deaths. I began to really comprehend the roadblocks to success that were built into the game, that I couldn't overcome, and how those roadblocks were different with each game. In Black Ops 2, it was lag. I always said I'd be a 3 KD player with 1,000 score per minute if I wasn't taking laggy deaths, thanks to the game-breaking netcode. And that's when I originally began to hypothesize about the possibility that they want that lag in there. And this is also why I say there's no such thing as being good at COD, because how do I know how often that netcode delay wasn't just working in my favor? You know, how do I know that me being good at Black Ops 2 just meant that I was really good at running around corners more often than other people? Because that's who has the advantage, is the person who runs around the corner. You know, how do I know I didn't just figure out how to game the system and abuse that game delay? Because all I ever did was run around corners. I made a video about it, where I literally said, you know, my strategy is to just fucking go balls to the wall and run around every corner and sprint into every gunfight and never take any moment to relax. And my strategy was to take as many of them down with me as I could. Seriously, you can go back. I made a video about it where I laid that out as my strategy. And I was like, I know it seems counterintuitive, but I'm telling you, I just run around every corner and it works. Because we know the guy sprinting around the corner has the fucking advantage as long as these game-breaking netcode delays are in the game. And so, as far as I'm concerned, that's just what it comes down to, is learning how to abuse each game. Is learning the one thing you have to do all the time to artificially inflate your stats in the game, or whatever. In Advanced Warfare, what I've argued in past videos is that the level of mobility combined with such small maps and spawn points that jump from one side of the map to the other completely randomizes the match's flow, that the game is basically designed to make sure everyone gets to shoot an unsuspecting victim at least a few times a match. And that goes back to the whole parking lot, you know, just flat, clear, empty space analogy I was trying to make. And you know, I haven't been trying as hard to maintain a decent combat record, because after Ghost I don't really take the game seriously anymore, and I've been using a lot of novelty weapons, which at this point is like half the guns in the fucking game, just for the sake of, you know, more unique, interesting YouTube clips. But out of habit, and with the goal of understanding the game better for the sake of commentaries, I do still regularly, you know, assess my deaths and what could have been done to avoid them. But the vast majority of the time, I really don't think there's anything I could have done differently. You know, usually it just comes down to, this guy came out of fucking nowhere at my flank and I had no way of knowing he was there. You look at a map like Urban, right? That's that Havoc DLC map. That map is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. No matter how good you are at Call of Duty, no matter how experienced you are, no matter how hard you try, no matter how intelligently you play, regardless of the extent of your map knowledge, you are going to take a significant amount of unavoidable deaths on that map every single time you play it. There's just no way around it. And the flip side of that is that you get free kills. But the problem is there isn't really room for improvement. There's no way to get better. There's no point where you say, here's something I learned the last time I played this map. I can employ that to my benefit this time around and do better. You aren't necessarily going to do better on that map the 100th time you've played it, because the experience is meaningless. It's just luck of the draw. The outcome is closer to random than it is to something being determined by the player's decision-making abilities or talents. And that's the problem. The match starts and everybody runs around like a chicken with their head cut off, and I mean, it's hectic and it's fast-paced, and I'm sure it's exciting for a lot of people, but I think more and more people are starting to recognize the pointlessness of it. There isn't any opportunity to devise new tactics or routes or creative ways to kill bad guys without getting killed yourself. Everyone just thrusts around in random directions and shoots at shit they see and barely notice when they get killed, because they're just instantly back in the game, right? They just tap X, they're just back in the game. They don't even know how many kills or deaths they had. They're just running around like a fucking chicken with their head cut off. You know, it's like fucking 3-year-olds playing in the mud. It's like a group of 3-year-olds wrestling in the mud. What's the point? Nobody fucking knows, but it's fun. Until you get a little older and you're like, you know, kind of like to do something a little more meaningful with my time, guys. Not that there's anything wrong with those of you who want to fucking fuck around in the mud, but I'm kind of past that point in my life. You know, I'm kind of over that. Ready to move on to, you know, maybe like a real wrestling match or a real sport of some kind. Read a fucking book. I don't know. I think more people are starting to realize, you know, they've been playing Call of Duty for 6 years straight, maybe even every day, but their scores are basically on par with the guy who's only been playing a month. You know, they're not significantly or consistently outdoing him. And that's the ultimate tragedy of such a low skill gap. It's a stunted skill ceiling. You know, like in Battlefield, it's been very fun. And again, I'm not saying, you know, Battlefield is, I'm not trying to like advertise Battlefield. There are a lot of you who aren't going to like Battlefield. It's not meant for a lot of you. I'm just saying, I'm just trying to point out a game where this type of thing that I do like exists, right? And it exists in Halo in its own way. It exists in Destiny to a lesser extent. You know, whatever fucking game floats your boat. But I'm just going to use Battlefield as an example again, alright? Battlefield's been very fun, and it's been very rewarding getting good in the helicopter, alright? 2 years ago when I first started playing, I could not fly the fucking helicopter. I couldn't get it off the ground without crashing. I would crash, you know, I'd get 10 feet off the ground and flip over on my side and die. I'd confuse the joysticks. People would spawn in my helicopter with me, and I'd get them all killed, and I lost friends. Just kidding. I mean, I did kill them, but they were still my friend afterwards, fortunately. But gradually I got better, and I started winning heli fights, and I got good with the 25 millimeters, and I'd use them to rain death on my opponents, and then graduating to the miniguns and winning every heli fight I ever got into, because now I can snipe them with the miniguns. Because in miniguns, they're really hard to aim, but when you get good with aiming them, they're really good. You know, I figured out tactics to win heat seeker fights by letting the enemy little birds first rocket hit me to trick them into coming closer, and then I deploy my ECM on their second rocket, and then they're out of rockets, and then they fell for my trap, and I lay into them with the minigun. I figured out how to counter the HVM, which is the super strong rocket that will destroy your little bird in one shot, but if you do a fucking flip, you'll fall to the ground faster than the guy can keep up with you with his fucking rocket launcher. So you do like a flip, and then you can, you know, you can avoid it. It's cool. It's the little things that you pick up from experience. I am almost invincible in the Little Bird, and it's because I've put countless hours into playing the Little Bird, because it's fun, and it's fun to see how good I've gotten. It's fun to think of, you know, when I could barely fly it, and now I'm this expert with it. And, you know, if somebody picked up this game tomorrow and got into the Little Bird and went toe-to-toe with me, I would win. He would not kill me once, and that's how it would be if we went 1v1 100 times in a row. Because you have to work hard and intelligently to kill a Little Bird, which means you have to get better and practice at it. And that's how it should be. That is the natural rule of law in life. But that's just not how it is in COD. You take a stupid fuck who's never played COD before in his life, you stick him in the match on Urban, he will get plenty of kills in his first match, regardless of the relative experience of everyone else in the match. And that's what gets that guy hooked, and that's what makes the game sell so well. It's COD's simplicity, its mediocrity, that allots it so much financial success, and that's why the developers designed that simplicity, that mediocrity into the game. I'm sure any of you who have ever played a real sport know how rewarding it is to get better at something, you know, to reach a new personal record in track, to, you know, score a new, you know, to get that starting position on the football team, to notice your skills improving, you know, when you hit a new max on your bench or whatever. And that's been one of the primary joys of video games in the past as well. You know, you play through Morrowind or some MMO online. At the beginning, you're a total noob, but by the end, you're a total badass, and it's funny to think how bad you were when it all started, and to see how far you've come. I remember being a total noob on RuneScape, and like being in awe of people who had rune armor and dragon scimitars, and then eventually finally being that dude with the rune armor and dragon scimitars, and being like, yeah, I'm a fucking badass, I made it to the top. And then being in awe of people with whips and full barrels armor, and working towards being that guy with a whip and full barrel armor, and the succulent satisfaction of finally reaching that point, like, yeah, I'm a fucking badass. Remember when I used to look up to motherfuckers like me. The fun of showing off shit you've learned to noobs. You know, think about it this way. If somebody came to you tomorrow and said, hey, what are you know, and you've been playing Call of Duty for like 6 years now, like most of us. Somebody came to you tomorrow, said, hey, what would you recommend I do to get better at Call of Duty? What would you say, realistically? Like, what would you say? Learn the enemy spawns on the maps? I don't know, some bullshit like that. There's nothing you could say. But if somebody came to me tomorrow and said, hey, how can I get better in the Little Bird? I'd have like a 30-minute spiel for them. In fact, I almost made a video about it once. You know, I'd be like, here's how you beat a helicopter, here's how you beat a attack chopper, here's how to beat a tank. If a tank's trying to shoot you, you gotta get right above it, because you can't reach you there. That kind of joy exists in all walks of life that require effort, and has existed in basically every video game too. Except COD, because COD has no soul. You'll recall in that fireside chat PR thing Condry did, he said, and I quote, players' KDs have gone up almost universally. Remember that? So, what he's essentially trying to say is, hey, all you guys who think the game is harder, you're wrong. Because everyone is doing better, so it must just be you that's having a harder time. You're just bad. But all this really means is that skill-based matchmaking has brought everyone's KDs closer to 1.0, to perfect equilibrium, successfully lowered the skill ceiling even further. Because obviously for somebody's KD to go up, somebody else's KD must come down. For every kill, there must be a death. There's no way around that, and that's why the KDs are up almost universally. That almost category is what was formerly the highest tier of player. So for example, I was a 2.4 KD player in Black Ops 2, and now they've dragged me to a 1.7 in Advanced Warfare. And I imagine the reason there hasn't been any changes to the SBMM system, despite the huge outcry from the community, is the devs said, hey, inevitably someone is going to quit, but it's either going to be Batman or the 10 million noobs he crushes daily. Better to lose on Batman $60 than 10 million noobs $6 bajillion. Either a minority of strong players is going to make the game less fun for weak players, thus making them less likely to buy the game, or we make it impossible to be a strong player. which will piss off what were strong players, but the strong players are in the minority, because if they weren't in a minority, they wouldn't be considered strong players. The top tier of skill will always be the minority group. If they were in the majority, they would just be average. Now, those in favor of SBMM will say, hey, go fuck yourself, Batman. You shouldn't be allowed to beat up noobs. And that's true, but the problem is they're implementing a skill-based matchmaking system in a game where there's very little room for skill to actually make a difference. The real purpose and accomplishment of this system is that it quarantines stronger players. It makes sure that weaker or newer players never have to go up against someone who has a leg up in one of the very few areas that skill can make the slightest difference. Better reaction times, better aim, more awareness of their surroundings, like, noticing red dots on the minimap or what have you, better understanding of spawn patterns. These are the last few small little spaces of skill gap where a difference between two players can be made, and it's not that these are things anyone can be especially good at in COD, it's just that some people are just fucking stupid at them. I know for a fact there's a sizable portion of COD players who straight up do not understand the concept or purpose of the minimap. And I know I can be kind of hard on this sort of hypothetical stupid player. It's not even that they're necessarily stupid, it's that a lot of time you just have the really little kids who aren't good at the game, who don't understand to look at their minimap, right? And that was an area that I was able to exploit to great effect in Black Ops 2. I called in a ridiculous amount of spy planes in that game, and the trick was predicting what someone was doing, where they were going based on their little red dot, getting the leg up on them. It was one of those last bastions of skill gap that could be taken advantage of by an intelligent player, and the developers recognized that, and they recognized that fucktards were getting pwned because they didn't understand what the red dots on the minimap were, and they didn't want to run spy plane because they wanted to get through really good high score streaks, because COD had convinced them they are badasses who are too good for a lowly 3-kill streak reward. So in the next game, they basically tried to take the UAV out of the game to make sure that shit didn't happen anymore. But of course, then Ghost was way too slow paced and yada yada yada. I've talked about all this shit before. The point is, you have these last little areas of skill gap that seemingly cannot be compressed any further through game mechanics, through actual game mechanics. Because again, that's what Ghost tried to do and ended up failing miserably because of it. They tried to implement game mechanics that basically made the UAV and the minimap useless, and ultimately that game was rejected. So instead of that, this time around, they just made sure that players who had any talent in these areas are locked away in a different bracket, and because it was never that you were better at something than other people, it's that you knew how to take advantage of what would be considered a very minor mechanic in most other games, while the people you were up against did not have any clue how to take advantage of those same mechanics. So instead of taking those mechanics out of the game, they just make sure that people who understand those mechanics are getting matched with other people who understand those mechanics, if that makes sense. But now that all the stronger players are stuck together, because there's no opportunity for any of them to actually outplay one another, the small area of skill gaps I was just talking about have very low skill ceilings. Alright, we both know how to examine data from our minimap and make in-game decisions based on that, right? There's a skill ceiling there. We can't get much better at looking at our minimap. And because the maps are so small and the information you can infer based off your minimap is really so limited, there's no room for any player to actually outplay another player. It forces equilibrium. It forces random. Victory is random. It's all random, which is how they want it. And I think the reason people get so frustrated with SBMM is because they begin to recognize that so much of it is out of their control. What steps can I take to ensure my team wins this match? What did I do wrong in the last match that I should do differently in this match? There's no real answer to those questions because there's so little room for skill or strategic thought to make a difference. The only answer is I will thrust around the map and try to kill more people than I get killed by. That's all it ever comes down to. The next time you lose a match, ask yourself what you should have done differently. I bet you the best answer you can come up with is something generic, like I should have won more gunfights. But really, that wouldn't have made a difference because there isn't even any respawn time. So long as there's little to no actual skill involved in Call of Duty, skill-based matchmaking only compresses the skill gap further. And that's why people hate SBMM. It's not because they hate having to try, it's because they want to have some level of control over the outcome of the match, which is a pretty reasonable request if you ask me. Now in the end, as always, it just comes down to using public opinion to tip the scales. The lower skill gap has to turn off more fans than it attracts. The biggest obstacle towards molding public opinion on this subject is that a lot of people simply don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. And I feel like if more fans were aware of the direct link between skill gap compression and lower game quality, the direct link between skill gap compression and SBMM frustration, they would ask for a wider skill gap. And it doesn't have to be a huge skill gap. You look at COD 4, World at War, there was a skill gap there, but it wasn't nearly as large as what you see in most other games. Call of Duty can retain its casual appeal. It doesn't have to be a huge skill gap, it just has to be more than a roll of the dice. Call of Duty needs to change, and we can help move that process along by shining a light on the inevitable downsides of skill gap compression. This year, as the hype train for Black Ops 3 is chugging along, Let's make lag, the inferior tech, and the compressed skill gap a part of the conversation. Because every year these issues are glossed over as we are all getting excited for the next big release. But if we made them an issue, real change can be effected. Juggernaut went away, Second Chance and Death Streaks got pwned. We won some dedicated server support. We got them to adopt a score streak system over just a kill streak system. Then Ghost tried to go back to just kill streaks, and then the community got pissed off and forced them to reverse that decision too. Community anger will have an effect. They will respond. The game will reflect the preferences of the players. But the catch is, we have to get people talking about more than just the tip of the iceberg. We gotta go deeper and get pissed off about the stuff that is more significant and more entrenched in the game than just what we can simply observe at first glance. So I hope you will ask questions about these issues and raise concerns about these problems during the next few months of our collective conversation about Black Ops 3 and the future of Call of Duty, because so long as they can get away with shifty ass PR bullshit, pretending they have a new engine when they don't, pretending their half-ass deadies fix lag when it doesn't, they don't have to change. They've defused the controversy without actually doing anything to fix the problem. Because that's the most profitable thing, because PR doesn't cost nearly as much as actual solutions. And that makes it more profitable even if they lose a few customers who recognize the bullshit. So what we want is as many people as possible to recognize the bullshit, so that there's a greater chance of a greater amount of people saying, hey, we're not putting up with this anymore. We deserve better. This year, just say no to Black Ops 3 bullshit. Now, before I go, I wanted to talk briefly about the little tiff with Drifter in the comments section of the last video. So for those of you who weren't paying attention to the comment section of the last video, Drifter left this comment. You are very good at emphatically saying nothing. Sorry, man, but the points you make or imply are simply not logical. Now, originally, I was pretty heated about this, because this isn't just a matter of ego. This isn't like, oh, Drifter hurt my feelings, now I'm upset. I want to be clear that when a YouTuber of this size leaves a comment like that, there is a tangible effect, and they are aware of what effect it has. When Drifter leaves a comment like this, it discredits me. Now, YouTube moves the comment of the biggest YouTubers to the top of the comments page. And the thing is, I have these long-ass videos that can be intimidating, right? A lot of people see the length and immediately feel the urge to click away because a video that long is like a commitment, you know? I have to hope that people will take that chance on me and my commentary, and that's why I try to get some really great clips to put at the very front, and even on much shorter videos, 5 to 10 minutes. From other people, most viewers we know click away in like the first 10 seconds. And as a YouTuber, you have to go all out in that first 10 seconds and hope that, their snap judgment is in your favor. But if the top comment is a guy with 800,000 subs, he's been around for years, he's well known in the community, his opinion has some weight, and deservedly so. There are gonna be people who see that comment and trust his judgment, and if his judgment is that I'm illogical and that this 42-minute video emphatically says nothing, they're going to click away that much faster, right? That hurts me. If I'm hoping to attract new subscribers through this video, this comment is gonna make it a lot harder to do that. And keep in mind, even though there was a lot of back and forth in the reply section of that comment, the comment itself already has like 300 thumbs up. People clicking on this video who have never heard of me before will see that comment and assume that Drifter's right because, hey, 300 other people agree with him. And keep in mind, every one of those thumbs up on that comment is someone who's saying, I like Drifter, so fuck this guy. Which means I'm missing out on a lot of potential subscribers, or even worse, I'm losing my own subscribers simply because of this comment. In fact, if we look at my analytics, on the first day this video was posted, which was when Drifter left that comment, I had a net negative amount of subscribers that day. That's the first time that's ever happened to me, where a video produced a net negative result for my channel. Now, it was only a single day, and although it was very disheartening, it's been net positive in the days since then, but it's still an extremely high amount of subscribers being lost on that video relative to other videos. It's disproportionately higher, the amount of subs that I'm losing on that video as opposed to any other video. And keep in mind, people clicking away that much sooner means shorter watch times, which means the video gets less traffic in the long run. Now, I could just delete the comment, but then it looks like I'm admitting he's right, like I'm trying to suppress dissent because I don't want people to know the truth, when that's just not the case because I disagree with this comment wholeheartedly. But that's not what I'm upset about. There is a tangible effect, but that by itself isn't the problem. I think people are entitled to their opinions. Drifter's not the first person who has this criticism of me. But what was irritating about it was the nature of the comment itself. It doesn't actually provide any info or arguments for people to make a decision for themselves, right? It's the equivalent of saying, hey, take my word for it, this video is pointless. So there's nothing I can disagree with, there are no points I can counter-argue. There's not any opportunity to push back against this claim. It's kind of a cheap shot. And that's what irritated me, not the comment itself. I don't think people should feel like they're not allowed to criticize me just because that might hurt me. If somebody disagrees with what I'm saying, I absolutely support their right to make that disagreement public, even if it comes to some tangible cost to me. It was just the unsubstantive nature of the comment that I thought was unfair. And the reason I was heated is because it's not the first time, right? This goes back to like a year ago when I had like 3,000 subscribers and I was trying to raise a stink about lag on Ghost and how the hybrid system of Deadies and listen servers was kind of bullshit, and I was accusing COD of lagging on purpose. And Drifter made a very similar comment, both on Twitter and Reddit, and it basically said I provided no real evidence and I was completely illogical. But it's that same sort of irony where it's not actually mentioning any specifics. And it irritated me then because I felt like, I had a reasonable counter argument to this claim, but it's not like that's gonna get heard, right? At least not then. But this time around, I was like, fuck it. If this is something that's gonna keep happening, might as well get our balls out on the table, you know what I'm saying? There's no actual substance to these attacks for me to logically deconstruct. And it irritated me then, and it really irritated me this time. Especially because it's one thing when it's my lag conspiracy video, which is admittedly very hyperbolic, but in the last video, I don't think I was arguing anything that absurd. So I was pissed. I told Drifter the gloves were off and this was about to get ugly, and I was prepared to throw everything and the kitchen sink at him, rhetorically speaking. It would have been brutal and also probably self-destructive, just like this little bit right here is probably self-destructive. And my channel would have gone out in a glorious blaze of gunfire and blood, as it was always intended to. But, like 30 days later, out of the blue, Drifter came and apologized on Twitter, which admittedly was big of him. But there's a larger point I want to make about this that I think it's important people understand, because it speaks to the biggest problem that needs to change if future Call of Duties are going to be of a higher quality. When Drifter and I got into that back and forth in the comment section, it seemed like everyone was worried about drama, as if this was high school, right? But it's not. Let me be very, very clear about this. The major YouTubers and relative minor YouTubers like myself, covering Call of Duty and the industry in general, need to be able to engage in professional disputes and express opinions in opposition of one another without their arguments being unfairly delegitimized as quote-unquote drama. This isn't high school, this is a real industry. The words we speak in these videos have power. Words have power. Our words can and will have an effect on real people's finances. Whether it's us, or the companies we're discussing, or the consumers listening to those discussions. This isn't some schoolyard circle jerk. This is a legitimate information platform that people are using to inform their decision-making process when it comes to how to spend their money. This is the biggest entertainment industry in the history of mankind. And the numbers back that up. We know games are bigger than Hollywood at this point. And the simple fact is that YouTubers are the primary source of journalism covering this industry, and have been for some time. And it begs the question, what is the point to journalism in the private sector? Both in regards to major YouTubers and, again, even minor YouTubers like myself. I realize YouTube is this sort of gray area between professional and amateur coverage of topics, but the facts are that the vast majority of gamers today are getting their gaming-related news and information from YouTube commentators. We know this to be true. I'm not saying every gaming YouTuber set out to be a journalist, but at this point, we have adopted that role. We are the primary catalyst through which gamers are consuming information about the products in the industry. In any other field of journalism, covering politics or the agricultural industry or the healthcare industry or even the music industry, covering these topics, relaying information to an audience is supposed to serve one primary purpose, which is informing the audience, the consumer base, so they have all the facts when they are trying to make the best decision about how to spend their hard-earned money. I hear Jay-Z has a new music service called Tidal. I read a great piece explaining the pros and cons of this new service, and based on that information, I conclude it gives the artists a better deal, which I agree is important for smaller music artists, but ultimately, based on the facts, I decide that Spotify is the better option for me personally as a consumer. Without a media to act as a referee in the industries in which I regularly consume products, I'd just be guessing. I'd be flipping a coin, and probably half the time, if not more, I'd end up making the less beneficial choice for myself as a consumer. Because you can't just trust what the companies making their products tell you about their products, right? We can't just take their words for granted, because obviously they have a vested interest in painting themselves in the best light possible and their competitors in the worst light possible. I've always seen journalism covering topics like we do here on YouTube as a sort of referee, right? I've said business is a competition between the business and its customers. The third-party independent group who covers the industry is supposed to act as a referee, making sure nobody's cheating. Well, right now, the journalism core of the gaming industry is doing a really lousy fucking job. Because in the past, when Activision has gone on about how this time it's a new engine or how the Deadies are going to fix the lag problem, nobody's ever called them out on that. Nobody. And it's Activision intentionally misleading their fans. Activision is cheating. They are deflating the balls and biting off people's ears. And the ref, consisting of every major YouTuber covering Activision's products, has their collective thumb up their butt. And you can't help but wonder if the special relationship that the ref has with one of the teams is influencing his decision-making process. If the ref made most of his money selling Patriots gear, Wouldn't there be some concern that maybe this referee's decisions are a bit biased in the Patriots' favor? Because the better the Patriots do, the more gear he sells, right? If they make it to the Super Bowl, that ref is going to make a lot of money. And worse, the ref wants to stay in the good graces of the Patriots, so the Patriots continue to give him exclusive access to said merchandise. Or if we use my Jay-Z title example again, imagine if the guy who wrote the article I'd read had some sort of special business relationship with Jay-Z himself, and Jay gave him and maybe a few other news outlets special exclusive access to his album before it came out, so they could all write about it and share info about it long before it came out and long before anyone else could write about it. He would get a fuck ton of traffic on his webpage or magazine or blog or whatever. It would make him a lot of money. And you have to wonder if he wouldn't have hesitated to be so critical of Jay-Z in the piece I read. You have to wonder if he'd be willing to bite the hand that feeds so much. Because you have to wonder if he'd be concerned that maybe if he's critical of Jay-Z, Jay would stop giving him exclusive access to his albums before they release, while still giving it to his competitors, giving his competition a leg up on him. His fans start reading other authors because they have all the juicy inside deets that he doesn't. So he might have felt compelled to downplay the weaknesses and exaggerate the strengths of Tidal. And had that article been more ambiguous, less clear, or had it been just so slightly tilted in favor of Tidal, I reading it may have ended up making an ill-informed choice. I might have ended up paying more for less, or maybe paying the same amount but choosing a lower quality product. Or in some cases, maybe the same quality and the same cost, but a product that isn't suited to my tastes or needs as much as a different product. Because when I read the article, it was written in a way that played the product up to appeal to every taste and accommodate every need. Now here's the thing, we know Jay-Z isn't that thin-skinned. If such a hypothetical were to exist, he'd probably still treat that music reporter fairly, but I don't think we can expect the same from Activision. The only reason Activision dishes out these exclusive rights every year is because it's such an effective way to engineer the hype train. The whole purpose of it is profit, so I doubt they'd be interested in taking the less profitable high road. I doubt they are going to give someone like me that kind of special treatment. I don't see Angry Joe or Total Biscuit getting invites to LA every year, even though they have bigger audiences and much more views per video. Because they're risky, because they tell it like it is. They might very well shit all over the game and end up hurting their sales, which defeats the entire purpose of that marketing strategy in the first place. Maximizing profit and reducing risk. That's what it's about. Surely we all know by now that major corporations are going to make the most profitable decision regardless of anything else besides profit. I mean, some people think that's a bad thing, some people think it's a good thing, but we all know that that's how it is. We all agree on that. If these major COD YouTubers were critical of COD, they probably wouldn't get invites back, because Activision is thin-skinned and with a small cock to boot. We know this is a problem with news networks and politicians right now. News people have to go easy on politicians, because if they fuck with the politician, then the politician won't come on their network anymore. And if it's a big name, like Clinton or Bush or Obama, they want as many exclusive interviews with those motherfuckers as possible, so they get hella views, so they make hella money, so they go easy on motherfuckers so as not to scare said motherfuckers away. That exact same kind of relationship is what's taking place with Call of Duty right now. When Activision gives these major YouTubers exclusive access to footage and information and hands-on time with the game, it's like giving them exclusive rights to sell merchandise. It's giving them early, exclusive access to information that ultimately translate into a lot of money. And these guys will be the first to tell you that Activision doesn't pay them, but really they do. It's not putting, cash in their hands, it's giving them an exclusive deal that guarantees a large sum of money in their hands in the long run. And it's a bigger problem with a channel like Drifter, because Drifter does willingly take on the role of a journalist. Drifter is very different from channels like T Martin and Allier that are basically giant infomercials, and they don't really try to be anything else. But Drifter has substance in his commentaries. He makes persuasive arguments. He does in-depth reporting, these things that mold public opinion. In any other field of journalism, he would be required to disclose at the beginning of every video that he has a business relationship with Call of Duty that makes him a lot of money. I don't think it's a coincidence that for the last 3 years in a row, Call of Duty's viral marketing campaign has started with a video from Drifter. His channel has been an integral part of their advertising, but it also acts as a third-party independent source of information. It's sketchy, and I don't think he owns up to it. He says, well, they offered me one Klondike bar. What would you do for a Klondike bar? That's his reply. He consistently reasserts that he's not paid by Activision, but I think that is incredibly disingenuous. They aren't putting money in his hand, but he does have a mutually beneficial business relationship that makes him a fuck ton of money every year. And if my goal on YouTube is ultimately to highlight and criticize the ways that Activision has been able to diffuse controversies without addressing the underlying problems, I have to talk about this fucked up revolving door journalism. It's the elephant in the room. And I was talking about this problem before Drifter left that comment, just not in such specific terms, and in fact that might be why Drifter originally felt compelled to leave that comment in the first place. As an example, he recently made a video testing the dedicated servers on Advanced Warfare, right? It was a well done video, and it was journalism. That is a piece of journalism, that video. And we can pretend that YouTube is this amateur, platform, but at this point, that video is gonna reach more people than, most gaming physical publications that you read, right? And the casual observer watching that video would conclude that COD's connection problems aren't that bad. There's not really any other rational conclusion you can draw from watching that video. When he connects to people in South America, he makes sure to mention, and I quote, "That doesn't mean it's laggy." But it completely skirts over the real issue, which is the game-breaking netcode. And again, it's not that anyone's outright lying about anything. It's about over-exaggerating strengths and downplaying weaknesses like lag. It's not about what they say, it's about what they don't say, which is anything critical of Call of Duty ever. If 60,000 people see that video plays a huge role in convincing people that lag isn't really a problem, when we know for a fact that it is. It helps diffuse the controversy, and it's a million times more effective than Activision's own PR, because Drifter can come off as a third-party, independent confirmation, when really, the line separating Drifter and Activision's PR is pretty blurry. And it's just one video in a consistent pattern of Drifter's journalism reaching conclusions that are consistently in line with Activision's own PR. It goes all the way back to when AW was first released, and Drifter made a video about skill-based matchmaking that sort of argued in its favor. And ultimately, he took that video down, and he said he took it down, and I quote, "for a number of reasons," which he then never specified. But really, I think it was one reason, and that is that he took a position defending SBMM, and it was getting a lot of negative feedback on said video. And it's not that I'm saying, you can't trust these major YouTubers or Drifter. Nor am I saying you should stop watching them, or that you should hate them. If you enjoy watching Drifter, more power to you and him. I'm just saying you should take that special relationship he has with Activision into account when you do watch him. And more importantly, I hope everyone will take that special relationship into consideration when he shows up in my comment section trying to discredit videos and commentators that threaten the apparatus behind his substantial income. And I'm not against people wanting to make money and wanting to make more money. Because if my credibility is going to be attacked in a very public way in my own comment section, in a way that a private Twitter apology isn't going to fix, I hope nobody is surprised when I question the credibility of the person questioning my credibility. And I think Drifter himself should be more open about the nature of his mutually beneficial relationship with the Call of Duty franchise, as would be required in pretty much any other field of journalism. When reporting on Call of Duty, when doing game reviews, when he does commentary on lag and SBMM and his thoughts on the validity of the fanbase's criticisms, even the small things, like when he makes a video about how they fix frame rounding, and at the end he says, and I quote, "It's cool that they fixed something so small it makes me wonder what else they fixed." Those kind of little fucking things. You hear those from T. Martin too, talking about how they made it so you don't get back into a match you just rage quit. I think it's so cool that they fixed something so small. Almost like they have the same talking points. And again, it's not personal, but if I'm here to raise awareness about these issues, to attempt to rile up the community, to pressure Activision to implement significant change, then these guys' videos are like my primary obstacle. And if you look at the journalism core of any other field, whether it's politics or healthcare or agriculture, you'll see well-respected reporters and columnists have significant disagreements with one another all the time. And ultimately, that's healthy for the industry or the product being covered. It gives the consumer a more well-rounded view of the person whose views they are taking to heart when trying to make their decisions about what to spend their money on. And that is ultimately the entire purpose of any information core. And any self-respecting consumer should be constantly vigilant of the possibility that a member of that information core may be derelict in their duties to the people in the name of personal profit. And if people want to be suspicious and wary of me, because I may not have hard evidence for my claims, because I may be overdramatic, hyperbolic, or that I say nothing, then so be it. I will defend myself on these points, if I have to. And if I lose subs because of that, or because of this, I'll live with that too. It's no big secret that the vast majority of Call of Duty fans have been seriously disappointed with past COD games, even though they were super hyped before they were released. Nobody warned us about Ghosts, even though they all had plenty of hands-on time with it. I think that the major COD YouTubers play a role in that. They hype the shit out of these games while rarely ever taking a critical look at them. They are ultimately a part of the problem I am trying to tackle, and it's not because they're bad people. Just like I don't think, Call of Duty developers are bad people. It's just that business is a competition. This is a big soccer game, and I play to win. And you, as a consumer, should too. And I'll tell you this right now, don't worry about my feelings or Drifter's feelings, because we're getting paid for this. Worry about how you spend your money and what role we play in your decision-making process. The For the Win query of the day is what is the most let down you've ever been with a COD title relative to how hyped you were before it released? So I know a lot of people will immediately say, well, Ghosts, but I'm not saying what was the worst COD. I'm saying when was your hype the most out of touch with reality? Because I wasn't that let down by Ghosts because I was never that hyped for it to begin with. For me, MW3 was the biggest letdown because I was expecting like MW2 on steroids. Instead, it was sort of a watered down MW2 with no significant innovations or improvements over previous COD titles, which of course is the problem with the entire franchise right now. If you stuck around this long, you are a scholar and a gentleman, and I commend you. Please be sure to rate the video. This is Batman, signing out.
Terminated.